My name is David Hunter. I am 42 years old, and for the past 18 years, I have been married to my high school sweetheart, Laura. We have a beautiful daughter, Emma, who just turned 19 and is finishing up her first year of college, and our son, Jake, who is 17 and in his senior year of high school. On the surface, we are like any other family, a little quirky, a lot of love, and a life full of routine moments that have somehow managed to keep us all bonded together. But we never expected that one summer morning would throw us into a storm of confusion, curiosity, and dark secrets that we could have never predicted. It all started at our lake house. It was one of those rare, peaceful mornings when the entire world feels still. I got up early, relishing the quietness, and decided to take a walk around the property. As I rounded the edge of the yard, I caught sight of Emma and Jake. They were standing unusually close to each other, deep in conversation, with a seriousness that felt out of place. When they noticed me approaching, they jumped apart as if they had been caught red-handed. "Morning, Dad," Emma greeted me with a slightly forced smile, her cheeks pink. Jake only nodded, avoiding my gaze. Something about the way they both acted did not sit right with me. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just imagining things, I told myself. They were close siblings, after all. So, I headed back to the house, pushing away the nagging feeling in my gut. That night, after a relaxed family dinner, we all settled down in our usual routines. Jake excused himself to go to bed, and Emma mumbled something about catching up on schoolwork. Laura and I took a moment to unwind, catching up on a show in the living room. We were just settling in when a loud thud echoed from upstairs. Laura sat up, her face a mix of curiosity and concern. "That sounded like it came from Jake's room," she said, glancing up toward the staircase. We hurried upstairs, and there was Emma, standing outside Jake's door, looking flushed, her chest rising and falling with what seemed like nervous energy. I asked her what was going on, and she quickly answered that Jake had accidentally dropped his backpack and that she had only been helping him pick it up. Her explanation was straightforward enough, but there was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. Still, I decided not to pry any further. Maybe, I thought, it was just a bit of my overprotective parenting creeping in. But the next morning, Laura and I received a surprise we were not prepared for. Over breakfast, as casual as anything, Emma mentioned that she and Jake had been having serious conversations about relationships. She even brought up the fact that they had been watching some explicit content online to understand things better. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I looked over at Laura, who seemed equally taken aback. We were both struck silent for a moment, our thoughts racing. We decided to have a sit-down conversation with them, keeping everything open and safe for them to express their thoughts. Emma explained that it was all innocent curiosity, that she and Jake just wanted to understand things more deeply. Their candidness floored us, and while we were supportive of their curiosity, Laura and I were left uneasy. We were open-minded, yes, but something about the whole thing still felt off. In the following weeks, our household turned tense and unpredictable. Emma and Jake seemed to be sharing an intensity that went beyond typical sibling camaraderie. They would disappear to their rooms, giggling and whispering, reappearing later with flushed faces and lingering glances that seemed out of place. Laura and I exchanged worried glances, knowing that something was shifting under our roof. But how could we ask them? How could we know what was appropriate to question, and what was just our own worry getting the best of us? Then one night, just as we were getting ready to turn in, another loud thud echoed from upstairs. This time, Laura and I did not waste a second. We rushed up, and what we saw when we opened the door was something that neither of us would ever be able to forget. There, on the floor, were Emma and Jake, tangled together in a way that made it impossible to look away, yet impossible to fully comprehend. Emma was straddling him, their bodies locked in a way that was far too intimate, too intense for anything that we could rationalize. Laura and I were frozen in shock. We had been concerned before, but this went beyond anything we had feared. Emma and Jake did not even seem to notice us at first. They were lost, enraptured, their faces inches apart, breaths mingling as they lingered in this intimate moment. Eventually, they looked up, seeing us, their expressions a strange mixture of guilt and defiance. For a long time, we stood there in silence. Finally, we managed to pull ourselves together enough to tell them that their actions had to stop immediately. The following morning, we tried to handle everything as calmly as possible. We sat down, explaining to them that, while we understood their curiosity, their exploration was inappropriate and had to end. But our attempt at rationalizing their actions, at setting boundaries, only seemed to embolden them. Emma and Jake began pushing even further. They would touch each other under the dinner table, share lingering looks in front of us, and even sneak away from home, sometimes not returning until well after dark. We were at our wits' end, unsure of how to handle what felt like an uncontrollable situation. It was as if some invisible boundary had been shattered, and now, there was no putting things back in place. Each day brought a new challenge, a new layer of tension in the house. Laura and I were at a loss. We had always prided ourselves on our openness, on our ability to talk through any issue as a family. But this was something we had never imagined we would be facing. We considered seeking help, maybe talking to a family therapist. But a part of me hesitated, wondering if exposing these private family matters to an outsider would only make things worse. Laura was just as conflicted. Every night, we would lie in bed, discussing the situation until the early hours, trying to find some way to keep our family from unraveling. We debated setting stricter rules, but we knew that would only make them more defiant. Then one evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Emma and Jake walked in together, looking uncharacteristically serious. Emma cleared her throat, glancing at Jake before speaking. "Mom, Dad. Jake and I have been talking, and we think we need to tell you something." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly, and continued, "We want to be honest with you. We have feelings for each other. More than just brother and sister feelings." I could feel my stomach turn, a mix of disbelief, anger, and an odd sense of relief. At least they were finally talking to us openly. Laura and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement that we needed to handle this carefully, no matter how difficult it was to hear. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "We appreciate your honesty," I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "But you both must understand that these feelings, they're not healthy. It's natural to feel close, to be protective of each other. But these actions go beyond what is appropriate." Emma looked down, and Jake seemed to wrestle with something unspoken. They did not say anything in response, just nodded, and for a moment, I thought that maybe our words had gotten through to them. Maybe they would realize that what they were doing was wrong and that they would begin to pull back, to rediscover the boundaries that once kept us all at peace. But I was wrong. In the weeks that followed, things only grew more intense. It was as if that conversation had only given them a new kind of freedom, a validation of their choices rather than a deterrent. They started acting out, their defiance growing bolder with each passing day. It was not just their physical closeness anymore, their entire dynamic had changed, almost as if they were relishing the shock and discomfort it brought Laura and me. They were pushing boundaries, challenging us in ways I could never have imagined. One night, I heard a soft knock on our bedroom door just as Laura and I were settling in. I opened it to find Emma standing there, her face a mixture of anger and hurt. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "why can't you just accept that Jake and I, that we care for each other in our own way? You always said we could talk about anything, that you would always support us." I could feel my heart breaking as I looked at her. She was so earnest, so vulnerable. It was almost as if she genuinely could not understand why her mother and I were struggling with this. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make her feel heard without encouraging her behavior. But no words came. In the end, all I could do was tell her that we loved her and wanted what was best for her. As I closed the door, I felt a weight settle over me, a realization that there was no simple solution here. Laura and I were both growing weary, emotionally drained from trying to navigate this impossible situation. I could see it in Laura's eyes, the confusion, the helplessness, and the guilt. Were we somehow responsible? Had we done something wrong as parents? Eventually, Laura and I decided that we could no longer face this alone. We reached out to a family counselor, hoping that a professional might offer some perspective, some guidance on how to navigate this strange new world we had found ourselves in. When we told Emma and Jake about it, they reacted as expected, with anger and a stubborn refusal to participate. But we insisted, explaining that we needed help as a family. Reluctantly, they agreed to go, and soon we found ourselves sitting in a warm, softly lit room across from a gentle-eyed therapist named Dr. Peterson. She listened patiently as we explained our situation, her face calm and understanding, giving nothing away. When it was Emma and Jake's turn to speak, they were defensive, their words sharp, as if they were expecting judgment. Dr. Peterson, however, remained calm and thoughtful. She spoke to them without judgment, asking questions that seemed to soften their anger, if only a little. By the end of the session, they both looked slightly more relaxed, as if the act of talking to a stranger had somehow lessened their need to rebel. Over the next few weeks, we continued our sessions, slowly unraveling the complexities of our family dynamic. Dr. Peterson helped us to see that, in many ways, our close-knit family had created an environment that blurred boundaries. Emma and Jake had grown up feeling incredibly close to each other, perhaps even too close, and in their teenage curiosity and exploration, they had crossed lines without fully understanding the implications. It was not an easy process. The counseling sessions often left us all emotionally raw, and there were times when I wondered if it was even helping at all. But slowly, piece by piece, we began to find our way back to each other. Emma and Jake seemed to gain a new understanding of the impact their actions were having, not just on themselves, but on all of us. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Jake came up to me. He looked different somehow, quieter, more introspective. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity I had not heard in a long time, "I think I understand now. I'm sorry. I didn't realize what we were doing, how much it was hurting you and Mom." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. Jake's apology marked the beginning of a shift. I could see it in both of them. They were finally starting to grasp the weight of what had happened. They had crossed a boundary that should have never been crossed, and now, there was no way to undo the past. But at least they were beginning to understand the consequences. Over the next few weeks, things felt calmer in the house. It was not as if everything had gone back to normal, that was impossible now, but there was a new kind of peace. Laura and I were cautious, treading carefully around the fragile progress we had made, knowing it would take time for trust and normalcy to return. Our family therapy sessions continued, each one peeling back another layer of the confusion and hurt we had all experienced. Dr. Peterson encouraged us to talk openly, to share our feelings and fears without judgment, and it was liberating in a way. Even though it was painful, having that safe space to confront our emotions began to bring us closer together. Emma and Jake were learning to express themselves without leaning on each other inappropriately, finding ways to channel their curiosity and need for connection into healthier outlets. But despite the progress, there was one night that I will never forget. It was late, well past midnight, and I was up in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water, lost in thought. I looked out the window, my mind drifting over the events of the past few months, trying to make sense of it all. And that was when I heard a soft shuffling sound from the hallway. Turning around, I saw Emma standing there, looking like she had just woken up. She approached me slowly, her face unreadable in the dim kitchen light. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" I nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. She pulled out a chair, her hands folded on the table, her eyes downcast. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that seems to fill every corner of a room, heavy and thick. Do you still think of me the same way?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Or have I changed things for you forever?" The question cut deep. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of having lost something precious, something irreplaceable. She was no longer the little girl who had once held my hand crossing the street, or the teenager who would come to me for advice on everything from school projects to friendships. She was standing on a precipice, and I knew my answer would determine whether she would fall or step back. Taking a deep breath, I reached out, placing my hand over hers. "Emma, no matter what has happened, you are my daughter. Nothing will ever change that. You have made mistakes, yes, but we all do. What matters is that you are trying to understand them, that you are taking responsibility. That takes courage, and I am proud of you for it." She looked up, relief softening her features, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the old Emma. She leaned forward, resting her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly, feeling the warmth of her embrace. It felt like a release, a letting go of all the tension and heartache that had weighed us down for so long. After that night, things truly began to change. Emma and Jake started spending more time apart, finding their own paths instead of clinging to each other. Emma threw herself into her studies, focusing on her college goals with a determination I had not seen before. She joined clubs, made new friends, and it was clear she was rediscovering herself, independent of her brother. Jake, too, began to come into his own. He joined the school's track team and started hanging out with friends outside of school, something he had never shown much interest in before. He seemed lighter, more open, and slowly, the intensity that had once defined his relationship with Emma faded into something more like true sibling camaraderie. Laura and I watched them grow, feeling a mix of pride and relief. It was as if we were all slowly waking up from a strange, unsettling dream. Our family dinners became more relaxed, filled with laughter and genuine conversation rather than tense silences and stolen glances. It was not perfect, there were still moments of awkwardness, lingering traces of the past, but we were healing, all of us. One evening, a few months after that late-night conversation with Emma, she came to us with news. She had been accepted into a study abroad program for the upcoming semester. It was a chance to study in Italy, something she had dreamed of for years. Laura and I were thrilled for her, and we could see the excitement shining in her eyes. As the departure day approached, we prepared ourselves for her absence, knowing that this was not just a temporary goodbye, it was a new chapter for her, a fresh start. Jake seemed supportive, if a little sad, but he handled it with maturity, understanding that this was something Emma needed. The day she left, we all went to the airport to see her off. She hugged us tightly, tears in her eyes as she thanked us for supporting her. When she hugged Jake, I saw a tenderness there, a true sibling bond that had emerged from the chaos we had all been through. They exchanged a few whispered words, and I knew that whatever had once been between them was now a memory, a chapter closed. As we watched her plane take off, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had all come so close to losing each other, to being pulled apart by confusion and choices we could not understand. But in the end, we had managed to find our way back. We had chosen to heal, to learn, and to forgive. Driving back from the airport, I reached over, taking Laura's hand in mine. She looked at me, her eyes soft, a small smile playing on her lips. We both knew that we had weathered a storm together, and that in the process, we had grown stronger, more resilient. Our lives slowly returned to a new kind of normal, one shaped by the scars we bore but also by the strength we had discovered. We had learned that love, in all its forms, could withstand even the darkest moments. Months passed after Emma left for her study abroad program, and life at home settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. Jake was busy with his final months of high school, balancing schoolwork with his newfound passion for track. Laura and I felt like we had crossed a threshold, moving into a new phase of parenting, one where we were both more relaxed and more mindful of the boundaries and openness within our family. It felt like we had found a delicate balance, something we could hold on to without fear. Emma would call us often from Italy, sharing stories of her travels, her studies, and the new friends she had made. Her voice held a lightness, a sense of freedom that we had not heard in a long time. She was thriving, finding her independence and identity away from the shadows of the past. Laura and I would sit together in the evenings, listening to her stories, grateful that she was finding joy in adventure, finally able to be herself without any of the constraints or confusion that had weighed her down. One evening, as we were finishing up dinner, Jake sat across from us, fidgeting with his glass. He looked up, a small, almost nervous smile on his face. "Mom, Dad," he began, pausing as if gathering his thoughts, "I wanted to talk to you about something." Laura and I exchanged a quick glance, a silent understanding that even though the last year had been difficult, we were ready to listen, to be there for him, whatever he wanted to share. Jake took a deep breath, looking down at his hands before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about college, about what I want to do, and I think I want to major in psychology." There was a beat of silence, and then Laura broke into a warm smile, nodding in encouragement. "Jake, that's wonderful. I think you would be incredible at it." Jake looked up, his expression softening, and there was a sense of relief in his eyes. "I guess, going through everything we did, it made me realize how important it is to understand people, to help them find their way. I want to learn more, to help people who might be struggling the way we all did." His words struck a chord, and I felt a deep sense of pride. Jake had gone through so much, had been pulled in so many directions, but he had found a way to turn it into something positive, something meaningful. Laura reached over, squeezing his hand, her face filled with a pride that mirrored my own. As graduation approached, Jake continued to prepare for college, diving into his studies with a dedication that seemed to grow stronger each day. He had become more open, sharing his thoughts and dreams with us in a way he had never done before. There was a maturity in him now, a sense of purpose that seemed to fill the house with a renewed energy. On the day of his graduation, we stood in the audience, cheering as he walked across the stage, his face shining with pride. Emma had flown back from Italy to be there, and seeing the two of them embrace after the ceremony was a moment that filled us all with a deep, quiet joy. They were siblings again, bound by a shared history, but each on their own path, growing and moving forward in their own ways. After the ceremony, we gathered as a family, laughing, reminiscing, and celebrating Jake's achievement. There was a lightness in the air, a feeling that we had all come full circle, finding a new kind of wholeness. The trials and tribulations of the past were still there, etched in our memories, but they had become part of a story that had shaped us, that had taught us all something about resilience, understanding, and love. As we drove home that night, I looked at my family, each of us lost in our own thoughts, and I felt a profound sense of peace. Laura reached over, her fingers intertwining with mine, and I knew that we had made it through the hardest part. We had come out the other side stronger, more connected, and ready to face whatever life would bring next. In the months that followed, life continued to unfold in the gentle way that it often does after a storm. Emma returned to Italy to finish her studies, her future full of promise. Jake began his journey into college, diving into his psychology courses with an eagerness that made Laura and me proud every day. We found joy in the simple moments again, family dinners, quiet nights, laughter shared over small things. The memories of that dark time still lingered, but they no longer held us captive. They were now part of our story, a chapter that had shaped who we were and taught us lessons that we would carry forward. And while we could never fully forget the trials we had faced, we knew that we had emerged from it all with a deeper understanding of each other and of ourselves. Looking back, I often wonder how we managed to hold on, how we found the strength to keep going when everything seemed to be slipping away. But I realize now that it was love, a fierce, unbreakable love that held us together, even in the darkest of times. Love for our children, love for each other, and a belief that, no matter what, we could find our way back to the family we had always been. And so, we moved forward, carrying with us the scars and the lessons, the memories and the hope. We had been tested in ways we could never have imagined, but we had survived, and in the end, we were stronger for it.